The first indication that something had gone profoundly wrong came not as an alarm, but as an absence. Research Station Helix 7, orbiting the neutron star designated KSR-140, continued to transmit telemetry at standard intervals. Power consumption remained normal. Life support systems reported optimal atmospheric conditions. Automated experiments progressed according to schedule. 47 researchers were documented as present by the station's biometric logs, but when Coalition Oversight attempted routine communication check-in, no one answered. Arbitrator Zen Talvik, chief observer for the Vecnary Concordant, stood before the holographic display in his sterile office aboard the orbital platform Judgment's Eye. His 6 arms moved with characteristic precision as he cycled through Helix 7's transmitted data. Everything appeared normal, disturbingly, impossibly normal. "Run the communication sequence again," he instructed his aide, a young Vecnary named Prex, whose carapace still gleamed with the blue tint of recent molting. "Sir, we've attempted 17 times across all standard and emergency frequencies," Prex replied, mandibles clicking with uncertainty. "The station's communication array shows full functionality. It's simply, no one responds." Talvik's compound eyes refracted the holographic light into prismatic patterns across his carapace. In 42 years of oversight work, he had investigated station disasters before: equipment failures, reactor breaches, biological contaminations, even once, a tragic case of shared psychosis among an isolated research team. But those disasters announced themselves. They left evidence, damage reports, distress calls, bodies. This was different. "Assemble a boarding team," Talvik ordered. "Full quarantine protocols. I want xenobiologists, engineers and security. We depart in 1 hour." As Prex hurried to comply, Talvik studied the station's exterior feed. Helix 7 rotated peacefully against the violent backdrop of KSR-1140's accretion disk. Lights glowed warmly in the residential modules. The observation deck's massive windows reflected stellar radiation in cascading patterns. It looked like a place where people lived and worked and dreamed of discoveries. It did not look like a tomb, but Talvik had learned, over decades of service, to trust the spaces between data points. The silence where sound should be, the absence where presence was expected. Something had happened to those 47 researchers, something that left their station pristine and their experiments running and their existence simply erased. The airlock cycled open with a whisper of equalizing pressure. Talvik led his team into Helix 7's primary corridor, each member encased in full environmental suits despite the station's insistence that atmosphere remained optimal. The boarding party moved with practiced caution. 2 Vecnari security officers with plasma carbines, Dr. Oren Vask, a crystalline Quellan, whose body refracted light into geometric patterns, Engineer Malice, a compact threen with 4 eyes positioned at cardinal points around her head, and xenobiologist Dr. Thors, a Sauridian whose serpentine form undulated gracefully despite the artificial gravity. The first thing that struck Talvik was the warmth, not just the temperature, which registered a comfortable 21 degrees Celsius, but the feeling of recent occupation. The lights were set to day cycle. A faint scent of prepared food lingered in the ventilation system. Somewhere deeper in the station, soft music played from someone's forgotten audio system, a melodic piece featuring instruments Talvik didn't recognize. "Life signs?" he asked Engineer Malice, who consulted her scanning equipment. "None, sir. No biological signatures above microbial level, but..." She paused, all 4 eyes widening simultaneously. "Sir, thermal signatures indicate activity within the past 3 hours. Multiple heat sources consistent with recently used personal quarters, active workstations, and..." She checked her scanner again, mandibles parting in what her species expressed as shock. "The galley prepared a meal approximately 40 minutes ago." They proceeded to the galley. What they found there would later appear in Talvik's official report, though he would struggle to describe it adequately. Words felt insufficient for the peculiar wrongness of the scene. Breakfast was served. 12 places set at the communal table. Meals laid out with care. Protein synthesizations, carbohydrate matrices, vitamin supplements, beverages appropriate to various species biochemistries. Steam still rose from a cup of what Talvik's database identified as coffee, a human stimulant beverage. A utensil rested against a plate where someone had been eating a grain-based porridge, half consumed. 1 bite away from completion, but no one sat at the table. Dr. Vask approached the coffee cup, his crystalline form refracting the overhead lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. Temperature reading indicates this was brewed 8 minutes ago, he said, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance characteristic of his species. Whoever prepared it never took their first sip. Check the personal quarters, Talvik ordered. They found more of the same. In researcher Calloway's room, human according to the door manifest, a book lay open on the bed, reader presumably mid-sentence. The mattress still bore the indentation of someone who had been sitting there moments before. In Technician Vrl's quarters, Anthari, a bird-like species, a half-written message glowed on a personal terminal. Remind me to calibrate the gamma spectrometer before. The sentence ended there. Not deleted, not completed, simply abandoned mid-thought. In the station's primary laboratory, experiments continued running. Automated systems recorded data, adjusted variables, maintained precise environmental controls for delicate quantum measurements. Dr. Senth examined a biological cultivation chamber where tissue samples grew in carefully monitored suspension. These cultures were checked 17 minutes ago, the xenobiologist reported, his forked tongue tasting the air unconsciously. Someone adjusted the nutrient flow. The technique is meticulous. Whoever performed this maintenance was calm, focused, competent. And then, Talvik pressed. Dr. Senth's vertical pupils contracted, and then they ceased to exist. The second erasure occurred 48 hours later. Kepler Observatory, a research installation studying exotic particle emissions from a pulsar designated J17048 Toti 4046, reported identical conditions. 94 researchers, all gone. Station pristine, systems operational, meals cooling on tables, personal logs ending mid-sentence. Arbitrator Talvik received the report while still aboard Helix 7, attempting to extract meaning from the absence of evidence. When his aide Prex relayed the news, Talvik felt something he rarely experienced, genuine fear. Same research focus, he asked immediately. Prex consulted the data. Yes, sir. Both stations were conducting quantum signature analysis of stellar remnants, neutron stars, pulsars, ultra-dense objects with extreme space-time curvature. Talvik's mind moved through the implications with methodical precision. Issue an immediate sector-wide alert. All research stations conducting similar experiments are to cease operations and evacuate to coalition safe zones. Sir, that's 743 installations across. I am aware of the scope, Talvik interrupted, his voice sharp. Do it now. And contact the Coalition Science Council. We have a developing crisis. Dr. Vask, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. His crystalline form seemed dimmer somehow, as if the light passing through him had grown troubled. Arbitrator, I must voice a hypothesis that disturbs me greatly. Proceed. What if this is not a weapon? What if it's a natural phenomenon we've never encountered because we've never looked this deeply into quantum space-time structures? The Quellen's harmonic voice wavered slightly. What if studying these stellar objects triggers something? A reaction, a defense mechanism built into the universe itself? Engineer Malice, who had been analyzing station systems, looked up sharply. That would imply intelligence. Natural phenomena don't selectively remove biological matter while leaving technology untouched. Unless, Dr. Vask countered, the phenomenon operates on a level we don't understand. Consciousness as a quantum state, life as a measurable variable in space-time equations. Perhaps we've discovered something that reality itself protects against. The implications hung in the recycled air. Talvik had spent his career investigating the explicable. Equipment failures had causes. Diseases had vectors. Even malice had motives. But this suggested they were confronting something that operated by rules they hadn't discovered yet, or worse, rules that specifically prevented discovery. We're calling an emergency session, Talvik decided. Full coalition attendance. Every species, every scientific authority. If this is a cosmic phenomenon, we need to understand it. And if it's a weapon, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Coalition Emergency Science Council convened in orbital neutral space, aboard the massive diplomatic vessel Unity of Purpose. 11 species sent representatives. The chamber was a marvel of universal design, atmospheric zones for oxygen breathers and methane breathers, gravity wells adjusted for various physiological needs, translation matrices converting communication into universally comprehensible patterns. Arbitrator Talvik presented his findings with characteristic precision. Holographic displays showed the silent stations, the abandoned meals, the half-finished thoughts frozen in personal logs, and most disturbing, the biometric data that showed all occupants present until a precise moment, then nothing. Not death signatures, not departure, simply absence. It's escalating, Talvik concluded. 2 stations in 48 hours. If the pattern continues, we may face exponential expansion. The chamber erupted in multilingual chaos. Representative Kix of the Threen Collective insisted it must be a weapon. No natural phenomenon exhibits such precision.
Council of Reth, a massive Halrathi, whose aquatic tank dominated one section of the chamber, argued for immediate military mobilization. If an unknown force can erase nearly 200 individuals, we must assume hostile intent. Dr. Land, speaking for the Corellian synthesis, proposed evacuation protocols. Until we understand the mechanism, all research stations should be abandoned. But it was Surgeon Proxy Meln, the Halrathi's senior scientist, who articulated the question that silenced the debate. Has anyone considered that we might be facing a threat we cannot fight? That understanding itself might be the danger. The chamber fell quiet. Surgeon Proxy Meln continued, his translated voice carrying through the aquatic medium of his tank. Both stations were probing quantum structures of stellar remnants. Both were using cutting-edge detection equipment to observe phenomena at scales smaller than we've ever accessed. What if observation at that level triggers a response? What if some thresholds of knowledge carry inherent consequences? It was a terrifying proposal, that reality itself might have boundaries, that some questions came with built-in punishments for asking. If that's true, said Dr. Orinvask, who had joined via quantum link from Helix 7, then we've crossed a line we cannot uncross. Our civilization has reached a level of inquiry that makes us incompatible with continued existence. Before anyone could respond, an aide entered the chamber and whispered urgently to Arbitrator Talvik. His 6 arms froze mid-gesture. A third station, he announced, his voice hollow. Meridian Research Platform. 58 individuals. Gone. Same conditions. The pattern was no longer a pattern, it was an escalation. 2 sectors away, in a modest research facility orbiting the moon of a gas giant, Dr. Keela Moss was having lunch when she received the emergency broadcast. She was human, which meant she was rare in this part of the galaxy. Her species was relatively new to interstellar affairs, only a century of faster-than-light capability, but they'd earned grudging respect for their tenacity and their peculiar psychological quirks. Keela worked as a restoration specialist, which was a profession that existed almost exclusively among humans. Other species had medical personnel, certainly, trauma surgeons and emergency responders, but restoration was different. Restoration assumed something other species considered impossible, that the dead might not be finished. She listened to the emergency broadcast in the station cafeteria, surrounded by colleagues from 6 different species. When the announcement concluded, all research stations conducting quantum stellar observations to cease operations immediately, the room filled with anxious conversation, but Keela sat quietly, her mind working through a problem no one had explicitly stated yet. Her colleague, a Vecnari named Thex, approached her table. You're disturbing calm, Keela. What are you thinking? Humans had a reputation for emotional expressiveness, but Keela had learned to moderate her reactions among species who found human affect overwhelming. Still, she couldn't quite hide her concern. Thex, do you know why humans archive the dead? The Vecnari's antennae twitched in confusion. I do not understand the relevance. We keep everything, Keela explained. When someone dies, even from natural causes, we preserve genetic samples, neural scans, biographical data, personality matrices, medical histories, communication records, everything that defined them as an individual. Do you know why? Sentiment, Thex guessed. Remembrance rituals. Preparation, Kayla corrected softly. We prepare for the possibility that death might not be permanent, that if we keep enough data, preserve enough of the pattern, someday we might bring them back. Thex compound eyes refracted confusion in prismatic patterns. But that's impossible. Death is entropy, irreversible thermodynamic process. Is it? Kayla asked, or is it just information loss? If you could reconstruct the information perfectly, every quantum state, every neural connection, every memory, would the person you restore be dead, or would they be themselves again? This is philosophical speculation, Thex protested. It's human psychology, Kayla replied. We refuse to accept loss as final. We prepare against impossibility. And right now, I'm thinking about nearly 200 people who've been erased from existence while leaving everything else intact. She pulled up her personal workstation and began accessing human medical protocols, specifically the ones other species rarely saw because they seemed pointlessly elaborate. What are you doing? If those people were erased at the quantum level, but the stations themselves remained, technology, atmosphere, gravity, ambient radiation, then there's still information present, residual patterns, quantum echoes. Not with Vecnari technology, Kayla agreed, but humans have been working on memorial reconstruction for 70 years. We've mapped the minimum informational requirements for consciousness. We've developed quantum pattern recognition algorithms specifically designed to rebuild individual neural architectures from fragmentary data. She found what she was looking for and felt her stomach tighten. Thex, I need to contact the Coalition Council immediately. Why? Kayla turned her screen so her colleague could see. It showed a human medical protocol with a designation that looked bureaucratic but carried weight she understood. Memorial persistence restoration. Quantum signature reconstruction. Because I think humans might be the only species in the galaxy who refuse to accept that those people are truly gone. The message reached Arbitrator Talvik during the third hour of the emergency council session, as various species debated whether to abandon all neutron star research permanently. It came through human diplomatic channels, official UN deep space response communication, marked urgent but not panicked. That in itself was notable. Humans tended toward emotional excess, but their military and scientific communications maintained eerie calm. The message was simple: we believe restoration may be possible. Request permission to send specialized team to affected stations. Will explain methodology upon arrival. Time sensitive. Commander Isak Reeve, UNDSR, Surgeon Proxy Meln, the Halrathi skeptic who had grown increasingly vocal during the session, immediately objected. What are the humans offering? Magic. These people are erased at the quantum level. Even if we recovered bodies, resurrection is thermodynamically impossible. They don't say resurrection. Arbitrator Talvik noted carefully. They say restoration. Semantic games, Meln dismissed. What possible technology could? Perhaps we should ask them, interrupted Representative Kix, the Threen counselor. Her species valued practical problem-solving over theoretical debate. We're facing a crisis we don't understand. If the humans claim they can help, let's hear their proposal. The vote was contentious, but ultimately pragmatic. Humanity's proposal would be heard. 12 hours later, Commander Isak Reeve materialized in the council chamber via quantum link projection. He was a lean man with gray-streaked hair and eyes that carried the particular weariness of someone who had seen things that age people prematurely. He wore a UN Deep Space Response uniform, dark blue with minimal ornamentation, and he carried himself with military bearing that somehow avoided aggression. Council members, he began without preamble, my team has analyzed the data from all three erasures. We believe we understand the mechanism, and we believe restoration is possible. Explain, Arbitrator Talvik demanded. The erased individuals aren't dead, Reeve said calmly. They've been removed from local space-time, but their quantum information remains coherent in the surrounding environment. Think of it like, he paused, searching for an analogy, like a portrait that's been erased from a canvas, but the paint molecules still exist in the room. If you can identify which molecules belong to the portrait, you can rebuild it. That's not how consciousness works, Surgeon Proxy Meln objected. You're describing information recovery, not resurrection. We don't claim to resurrect, Reeve replied evenly. We claim to restore. There's a difference. Resurrection implies creating something new from nothing. Restoration means recovering what's already there. Dr. Oren Vask, the Quellan astrophysicist, leaned forward, his crystalline form refracting curiosity. You're suggesting you can reconstruct neural patterns, entire personalities, from ambient quantum signatures, if the data is fresh enough. Yes, Reeve confirmed. We've been developing this technology for memorial purposes. Humans have a cultural imperative to preserve the dead, in case future technology makes restoration possible. We didn't expect to use it this soon, but, he gestured at the data surrounding them, circumstances require it. What's the mechanism? Vask pressed. Quantum pattern recognition and reconstruction, Reeve explained. A trained human operator enters deep neural immersion and uses our memory architectures to map the residual quantum signatures. Then they reconstruct the individual's pattern, every synapse, every memory, every personality quirk, and anchor it back into physical substrate. The council chamber fell silent. It was Surgeon Proxy Meln who finally spoke, his aquatic voice carrying disbelief through translation matrices. You're describing conscious pattern matching at the quantum level. That would require cognitive processing beyond any known biological capacity. Yes, Reeve agreed simply. That would cause irreversible neural damage to the operator, Meln continued. The human brain isn't designed to hold another person's entire pattern. Yes, Reeve repeated, his expression unchanged. Understanding rippled through the council. You're proposing, Arbitrator Talvik said slowly, that humans sacrifice their own cognitive function to restore the erased individuals. We're not proposing, Reeve corrected gently. We're volunteering. 200 of my people are already en route. Each can restore one individual. The process will cost them memory loss, personality fragmentation, neural degradation. but they've accepted the price. Why? The question came from multiple counselors simultaneously. Commander Reeve was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something the translation matrices struggled to convey, an emotional weight that wasn't grief or duty, but something uniquely human. Because we remember, he said. It's what we do. We remember the dead so completely that we refuse to let them stay dead. Those 200 people knew the risk. They volunteered anyway, because somewhere in the galaxy, nearly 200 beings were erased, and someone has to remember them well enough to bring them back. This is madness, Surgeon Proxy Meln breathed. This is humanity, Reeve replied calmly. We'll arrive at Helix 7 in 48 hours. If you'll permit us, we'll begin the first restoration. You can observe and decide whether to allow us to continue. The council had no adequate response. How did you argue against people volunteering to sacrifice themselves for strangers? The human vessel arrived with characteristic understatement. It wasn't a warship or a massive research platform. It was a medical vessel designated UNDSRV Memoria, sleek, efficient, and equipped with technology most species didn't recognize. When it docked with Helix 7, Arbitrator Talvik and Dr. Busk were present to observe. Commander Reeve led a team of 12 humans, each carrying equipment that looked more like meditation chambers than scientific instruments. They moved with quiet purpose. No wasted motion, no theatrical displays, just professionals preparing for difficult work. The first volunteer was Dr. Weilin Sato, a quantum neurologist in her mid-40s with kind eyes and hands that moved with surgeon's precision. Talvik watched as she entered the restoration chamber, a cylindrical device lined with neural interface nodes and quantum field generators. Dr. Kyla Moss, who had traveled with the team, explained the process while technicians prepared the equipment. Dr. Sato will enter deep neural immersion, Kyla said, her voice professionally calm despite what Talvik could read as human emotional strain. She'll access the residual quantum signatures in the station, ambient radiation, thermal patterns, electrical fields, everything that those 47 people interacted with before erasure. And then, Talvik asked, then she'll remember them, Kyla replied simply. She'll use her own neural architecture to map their patterns, every memory, every thought, every personal quirk that made them who they were. When she has the complete pattern, we'll use the quantum anchoring system to restore them to physical form. At what cost to Dr. Sato? Kyla's expression flickered. Sadness, pride, grief, determination, all compressed into a moment of human emotional complexity. She'll lose parts of herself, memories, cognitive function. We don't know exactly what will be damaged. The process is because they're worth remembering, Kyla interrupted softly. Every single one of them. The procedure began. Dr. Sato lay in the chamber, her brain activity displayed on holographic monitors that showed patterns Talvik had never seen. Neural firing cascading through regions associated with memory, empathy, pattern recognition, and something deeper, something that looked almost like grief, but more intense, more deliberate. She was remembering people she'd never met. For 6 hours, Dr. Sato's neural activity spiked and fell in complex rhythms. The monitoring team watched in silence as she accessed the ambient quantum signatures throughout Helix 7, sorting through countless patterns to identify the one that matched a specific individual. Researcher Jen Calloway, human, age 32, quantum physicist specializing in neutron star observation. When the reconstruction was complete, the quantum anchoring system activated. Energy fields pulsed through carefully calibrated frequencies, and in a medical bay nearby, matter began to coalesce. Talvik watched in disbelief as a human woman materialized on the restoration platform, solid, breathing, eyes closed but chest rising with regular respiration. She was alive. Dr. Sato emerged from the chamber moments later. She was also alive, but changed. Her eyes were vacant for several seconds, then focused with obvious effort. When she spoke, her words were slurred. Did it work? It worked, Commander Reeve confirmed, helping her to a chair. Dr. Calloway is stable. You did perfectly. I don't. Sato frowned, confusion crossing her features. I don't remember my daughter's name. The room went silent. You have a daughter, Kayla said gently. Her name is May. She's 17. She plays violin. Sato's eyes filled with tears. May, she repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. I remember she exists, but I can't see her face anymore. This was the price. Arbitrator Talvik felt something shift in his understanding of humanity. He had known them as tenacious, emotional, emotional, sometimes reckless. But this was something else entirely. This was love expressed as sacrifice, so profound it rewrote the volunteer's own identity. "Can you continue?" Commander Reeve asked Dr. Sato, his voice gentle but professional. She nodded. "Next one. I can do one more." "Dr. Sato, you've completed your procedure. We have other volunteers for one more," she insisted, her damaged cognitive
function unable to mask the determination beneath. "Someone has to remember them. I can hold one more." They let her. Dr. Waylin Sato restored 2 individuals before her neural damage became too severe to continue safely. By the end of the second procedure, she couldn't recall where she had grown up, what her profession had been before this moment, or why she was aboard a medical vessel. But when they showed her the 2 restored individuals, researcher Calloway and technician Vrel, she smiled with profound contentment. "I brought them back," she whispered. "They're here. That's enough." Over the next 6 weeks, 200 human volunteers performed the restoration protocol. Arbitrator Talvik observed 37 procedures personally. Each followed the same pattern, a human entering neural immersion, mapping the residual quantum signatures of an erased individual, reconstructing their pattern through sheer memorial persistence, then anchoring that pattern back into physical reality, and each volunteer emerged changed. Some lost decades of memory, some forgot their native languages, some retained cognitive function but lost emotional affect, leaving them peaceful but eerily distant. One volunteer, a young man named David Park, completed his restoration and couldn't remember his own name, but remembered every detail about the Anthari researcher he'd brought back. The restored individuals, remarkably, had no memory of erasure. To them, no time had passed. One moment they'd been conducting research or eating breakfast or mid-sentence in a personal log. The next moment they woke in a medical bay surrounded by unfamiliar faces, learning they'd been gone for weeks. Dr. Vask, who observed every restoration at Helix 7, became increasingly disturbed by the implications. "This violates thermodynamic principles," he told Talvik during a quiet moment between procedures. "Information recovery at this scale, this specificity, it shouldn't be possible." "Yet humans do it," Talvik replied. "Because they remember so completely that they make it possible," Vask said, his crystalline voice resonating with something like awe. "They hold another person's entire existence in their mind so perfectly that reality has no choice but to restore them. It's not technology, it's will." Surgeon Proxy Meln, the Halrathi skeptic who had initially dismissed human claims, arrived to observe during the 4th week of restorations. He watched 40 procedures without speaking, his aquatic form motionless in its environmental tank. Finally, he requested a private conversation with Dr. Kayla Moss, who had overseen all restoration procedures without volunteering herself. "Why don't you volunteer?" Meln asked bluntly. Kayla, who looked exhausted from weeks of managing neural immersion protocols, smiled faintly. "Someone has to remember the volunteers. After they emerge, they need someone who knows who they were before, what they sacrificed. I'm archiving their pre-procedure neural scans, personality assessments, personal histories. So someday if we develop better technology, maybe we can restore them too." "You're remembering the people who remember," Meln said slowly. "Yes, that's..." The Halrathis struggled with translation. "That's an infinite recursion of care. That's humanity," Kayla replied. "We refuse to forget, even when forgetting would be easier." Meln was quiet for a long moment. "I doubted your species' motives. I assumed you would exploit this crisis for political advantage. And now I've watched 40 humans sacrifice their cognitive function to restore beings they never met, from species they have no political alliance with, expecting nothing in return." Meln's translated voice carried something like shame. "I apologize for my skepticism." Keela's smile was sad. "You don't need to apologize for asking why. It's a fair question. We're a strange species. You're a necessary species," Meln corrected. "The galaxy needs people who remember this completely." On the 42nd day of the restoration effort, Archivist Then, one of the few human volunteers who had retained most of his cognitive function after his restoration procedure, sat with his family via quantum link communication. His wife and 2 children appeared in holographic projection, their faces bright with relief at seeing him alive and functional. But as the conversation progressed, something became clear. Then didn't recognize them. He knew they were his family. The intellectual knowledge was there, but the emotional recognition, the deep visceral knowing of loved ones, was gone. "Tell me about yourselves," he said gently as if meeting strangers. "I'm sorry, but I need you to help me remember." His daughter, perhaps 15 years old, stared at him with tears streaming down her face. Dad, it's me. It's Kira. Don't you remember teaching me to swim? Or helping me with my science project about quantum entanglement? Or I remember the concepts. Then interrupted softly. I remember that I taught someone to swim, but I can't see your face in those memories anymore. I can't feel what I felt then. His wife, a composed woman who seemed to be holding herself together through sheer will, asked the question carefully. Do you regret it? Then considered this. Talvik, who happened to be nearby and overheard the exchange, paused to listen. I brought back researcher Nilov, then said finally, a Quellan crystallographer who was studying stellar formation patterns. They have 3 children, a partner, a life's work that wasn't finished. He looked directly at his family through the holographic link. They're alive now. They get to continue. That person exists because I held them in my mind so completely that reality had to restore them. But you don't remember us, his daughter whispered. I don't remember the emotions, then admitted. But I know you exist. I know you matter. And I know that if I hadn't volunteered, someone else would have, and they'd have lost their family memories instead. At least this way you still have each other. His wife closed her eyes. That's not comfort. I know, Then replied gently, but it's all I have to give. I chose this. I'd choose it again, because that Quellan researcher deserved to live, and someone had to pay the price to make that possible. After the communication ended, Talvik approached Archivist Then carefully. That was painful to witness, the Vecnari said. Then nodded. Yes. Do you truly not regret it? Arbitrator, let me ask you something, Then replied. If you could save someone's life by giving up your ability to remember the color of your carapace, would you do it? That's not equivalent. It is, Then interrupted. I lost the ability to feel love for my family, but they still exist. They're still alive and healthy and whole. Researcher Nilav is alive and will return to their family. That's not a tragedy. That's mathematics. 200 humans paid a price so that 187 beings could continue existing. The equation works, but you lost. I lost nothing that mattered more than their lives, Then said firmly. That's the point. That's what humans do. We measure what we're willing to lose against what we can save, and we choose to save others, even when it costs us everything. Talvik had no response. How did you argue with that? The final restoration occurred on day 48. Director Pylarenic of Kepler Observatory, the Anthari, who had survived the second erasure only because she'd been in an experimental isolation chamber, was the last volunteer's restoration target. She had provided crucial information about the erasure experience, describing the sound of memory being unwoven, and she deserved to see her colleagues returned. The volunteer was Dr. Keela Moss. Commander Reeve tried to dissuade her. Keela, you've been coordinating all procedures. We need you intact. You have my complete procedural documentation, she replied calmly. And someone has to bring back the last person. Everyone else has volunteered. I can't ask others to pay this price and refuse to pay it myself. She entered the restoration chamber. Arbitrator Talvik watched the neural activity displays as Dr. Moss descended into deep immersion, her consciousness spreading through Kepler Observatory's ambient quantum signatures like roots seeking water. For 8 hours, her brain activity showed patterns of profound concentration, mapping, remembering, reconstructing. When the anchoring system activated and the final researcher materialized in the medical bay, the room filled with quiet celebration. 187 beings restored. Complete. Dr. Moss emerged from the chamber with empty eyes. For several minutes she didn't speak, didn't move. Medical scanners showed extensive neural reorganization. Her cognitive function had been fundamentally altered by holding another person's complete pattern. When she finally focused, she looked at Commander Reeve without recognition. Did it work? She asked, her voice childlike. It worked, Reeve confirmed, his professional composure finally cracking. Tears streamed down his face. You brought them back, Kayla. All of them. You did perfectly. She smiled, a pure, uncomplicated expression of joy. Good, that's good. She paused, confusion crossing her features. Who are you? I'm Isak, he said gently. I'm your commander. You're a hero. Hero, she repeated, tasting the word. That's a good word. She would never recover her previous cognitive function. The price had been total, but when they showed her the 187 restored individuals, beings from 11 species, reunited with families, resuming lives that had been interrupted, she smiled every time. I did that. She would ask over and over. Yes, they would tell her. You remembered them. You brought them back. And each time she would smile as if hearing it for the first time, as if that knowledge was the only thing she needed to be happy. 3 months after the last restoration, the Coalition Science Council convened again, this time to address the phenomenon that had caused the erasures. Dr. Oren Vask presented the findings with characteristic precision. The erasures had been caused by an ancient automated defense network, technology from a long-extinct civilization that had determined certain quantum research inquiries were dangerous. The network detected specific research frequencies and eliminated biological consciousnesses conducting that research.
We've mapped the network's detection parameters, Vask explained. By avoiding specific frequency ranges and observational methodologies, we can continue neutron star research without triggering erasures. What about the network itself? Asked Representative Kix. Can it be deactivated? It spans 12 sectors and appears to be self-repairing, Vask replied. Deactivation would require technology we don't possess, but understanding its parameters is sufficient for coexistence. The Council debated response protocols, research guidelines, and safety measures. All necessary, all important. But Arbitrator Talvik found his attention drifting to the observation gallery, where some of the restored individuals sat alongside human volunteers who had sacrificed their cognitive function. Director Pyla Rennick sat beside Dr. Kayla Moss, holding her hand gently while describing the crystal formations of her homeworld. Moss listened with childlike fascination, unable to form new long-term memories but content in each passing moment. Archivist then sat with researcher Nilov, the Quellan he had restored, discussing crystallographic patterns. Then couldn't remember his own family's faces, but he and Nilov had formed a new friendship, one based not on shared history, but on shared existence. Surgeon Proxy Meln approached Talvik during a recess. I've been thinking about the human volunteers, the Halrathi said quietly. About what they sacrificed. As have I, Talvik replied. In my species philosophy, we believe sacrifice must have proportional benefit. The mathematics must balance. Meln gestured toward the observation gallery. 200 humans, with permanent cognitive damage. 187 individuals restored. The equation should feel unbalanced, but it doesn't, Talvik said. No, Meln agreed. Because humans don't measure value the way we do. They measure meaning, and bringing back 187 lives has infinite meaning, regardless of cost. That's not logical. No, Meln said softly. It's better than logical. It's human. Commander Isak Reeve prepared to depart Coalition space 6 months after the last restoration. The UNDSRV Memoria had remained in orbit, its crew helping the restored individuals reintegrate and caring for the human volunteers, who could no longer care for themselves. Now it was time to return to human space, where medical facilities could provide ongoing support. Before departure, Arbitrator Talvik requested a private meeting. They met in a small conference room aboard the Memoria, Talvik with his 6-armed Vecnari form, Reeve with his grey-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. I've spent 42 years investigating crises, Talvik began. Equipment failures, political conflicts, natural disasters. This was the first time I've investigated a miracle. Reeve smiled faintly. It wasn't a miracle, it was stubborn memory. That's what makes it miraculous, Talvik countered. Commander, what your people did, what they sacrificed, has changed the galaxy's understanding of what's possible. Not technologically, ethically. We just did what seemed right, Reeve replied. That's the point, Talvik insisted. You saw beings in need and responded without calculation, without treaties demanding it, without profit motivating it. You simply chose to help, regardless of the price. Reeve was quiet for a moment. Arbitrator, may I ask you something? Of course. When your species encounters suffering, when you see people in pain, what's your first response? Talvik considered this carefully. We assess the situation, calculate costs and benefits, determine if intervention aligns with our interests, and if it doesn't, then we, Talvik paused, we generally do not intervene. Humans don't work that way, Reeve said softly. When we see suffering, our first response is how can we help? The calculation comes later, sometimes too late, which causes its own problems. But our instinct is to reach out, to remember, to refuse to accept that loss is final. That's not sustainable, Talvik protested. You can't save everyone. No, Reeve agreed. But we can save someone, and that someone matters. Those 187 individuals matter. The 200 humans who volunteered knew they'd be damaged. They chose to pay that price because the alternative, letting those people stay erased, was unacceptable. What happens to your volunteers now? Talvik asked. We care for them, Reeve replied simply. They sacrifice their cognitive function in service to others. That makes them heroes. We don't abandon heroes, even though they'll never recover, especially because they'll never recover, Reeve corrected. They gave everything. The least we can do is ensure they're comfortable, valued, and remembered for what they achieved. Talvik felt something shift in his understanding, not just of humans, but of moral responsibility itself. Commander, before you depart, I want to establish a protocol, on behalf of the Coalition. If this phenomenon occurs again, if any beings are erased by unknown forces, humanity will be contacted immediately. We cannot replicate your restoration technology, but you've proven you can. We'll come, Reeve confirmed, whenever you call. However far, if there's someone who needs remembering, humans will be there. They parted with mutual respect, two species, different in almost every way, united by the recognition that some choices transcended calculation. 2 years later, the story of the restoration had spread throughout the galaxy. It became known as the Remembering, a proper noun, capitalized in 14 languages, spoken with reverence in cultures that had never met humans before. Research stations throughout Coalition space maintained new protocols. Emergency beacons now included a specific frequency-designated memorial alert, a signal that would reach human space with priority routing. The 200 volunteers became subjects of study, art, philosophical debate. Some cultures created monuments, others wrote songs. A Quellan poet composed a crystalline symphony called The Ones Who Held Us, that played by refracting light through specially grown crystal structures. But the most significant change was quieter. Species that had previously calculated intervention based on profit or political advantage began asking a different question when encountering suffering. What would humans do? It didn't always lead to intervention. Resources were still limited, interests still conflicted. But the question itself shifted thinking, made compassion calculable in ways that hadn't existed before. In human space, the 200 volunteers lived out their lives in a specialized care facility called the Memorial Garden. They were honored not despite their cognitive damage, but because of what that damage represented. Dr. Keela Moss, who could no longer form new long-term memories, spent her days tending to actual gardens. Each morning she would wake, learn anew what she had done, and smile with profound joy. "I brought them back," she would say. "All of them." Yes, her caregivers would confirm. "You remembered them." And each time she would smile as if hearing the best news in the universe. Archivist Then, who couldn't remember his family's faces, wrote letters to them every week. His wife saved each one, not because the content varied. It didn't. His damaged memory caused him to repeat the same thoughts, but because each letter ended the same way. "I don't remember what it felt like to love you, but I know that I did. I know you matter. I know I chose this so others could live. I hope you understand. I hope you're proud." She was proud. They all were. 5 years after the Remembering, director Pyla Rennick of Kepler Observatory published her research on the Ancient Defense Network. Her work, combining quantum mechanics with archaeological xenotechnology studies, earned prestigious recognition across multiple scientific communities. At the awards ceremony, she was asked about the experience of being erased and restored. "I remember nothing of the erasure itself," she explained to the assembled scientists. "One moment I was calibrating sensors, the next I woke in a human medical bay, learning that Dr. Keela Moss had spent 8 hours holding my entire pattern in her mind until reality had to restore me." She paused, her avian features expressing something like reverence. "I've spent 5 years trying to understand what that means, that a human I'd never met sacrificed her cognitive function so I could continue to exist, that she held me, every memory, every thought, every personal quirk so completely that I came back intact while she was left unable to remember her own name." "How does that make you feel?" asked a journalist. "Responsible," Rennick replied. "I live every day knowing someone paid a profound price for my existence. That's not a burden, it's a gift, but it comes with obligation. I have to make this life worth what she sacrificed. We all do, all 187 of us." Later that evening, Rennick attended a private gathering of restored individuals. They met quarterly, this informal group from 11 species, united by the shared experience of having been erased and remembered back into existence. They called themselves the Held. At each gathering, they shared updates on their lives and discussed the ongoing philosophical implications of their restoration. But they always concluded with a ritual. One by one, each member would speak the name of the human volunteer who had restored them, along with one fact about that person's life before their sacrifice. When it was Rennick's turn, she stood and said clearly, "Dr. Keela Moss." Before her restoration procedure, she loved gardens, and taught neurobiology to graduate students. She had a laugh that made everyone around her smile. "She gave that up so I could live." Around the room, 186 other voices spoke similar remembrances. They were holding the memory of those who had held them. It was the least they could do. 10 years after the Remembering, the Coalition established a new award, the Memorial Persistence Recognition, given to individuals or groups who demonstrated extraordinary sacrifice in service to others. The first recipients were the 200 human volunteers, accepted on their behalf by Commander Isaac Reeve, now retired but still serving as their advocate and caretaker. The ceremony took place aboard the Unity of Purpose, the massive diplomatic vessel where the crisis had first been debated. Representatives from 40 species attended. Arbitrator Zen Talvik, now elderly by Vicnari standards, presented the award with words he had spent months composing. 10 years ago we faced a crisis that challenged our understanding of what was possible. 187 beings were erased from existence by forces we couldn't fight. We debated. We calculated. We assessed our options. And then humanity showed us a different way. 200 humans volunteered to sacrifice their own cognitive function to restore the erased individuals.
They didn't seek payment, they didn't demand concessions, they simply saw people who needed remembering, and they remembered so completely that reality had no choice but to restore them. This award cannot repay what was given, nothing can, but it can acknowledge a truth the galaxy must never forget, that the highest form of courage is choosing to save others at permanent cost to yourself. The 200 volunteers can't fully understand this honor, most can't form new long-term memories, some can't recognize their own families, but they smile when we tell them what they achieved. And that smile, that pure, uncomplicated joy in knowing they brought people back, that is the most human thing I have ever witnessed. We honor them not because they were extraordinary, but because they demonstrated what humans consider ordinary, the refusal to accept that loss is final, the determination to remember so completely that memory becomes resurrection. May we all aspire to remember that well. The chamber filled with the multilingual equivalent of applause, sounds, lights, biochemical releases, each species expressing respect in their own way.
Commander Reeve accepted the award with characteristic humility. They'd tell you they were just doing what seemed right, he said. That's what makes them heroes. 15 years after the remembering, Dr. Keela Moss passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 63. Her cognitive function had never recovered from the restoration procedure, but she had lived contentedly in the memorial garden, tending plants and smiling at stories about the person she had saved. Her funeral was attended by thousands. Director Pilar Rennick delivered the primary eulogy, her avian voice carrying through translation matrices to reach the assembled mourners from 20 species. Dr. Moss gave her life twice, Rennick said, once when she volunteered to restore me, sacrificing her cognitive function, and now in the natural way all biological beings eventually must. But the life she saved, my life, continues, and through that continuation she lives too. I am married now, I have children. I've published research that advances our understanding of the universe. I've loved and been loved. I've watched sunrises and tasted foods and felt joy and grief and wonder. All of that, every moment I've experienced since the day she remembered me back into existence, is a gift from Dr. Keela Moss. She paid for my continued existence with her own memories, her own cognitive function, her own identity. How do you thank someone for that? You live fully, intensely, with the awareness that someone thought your existence was worth the cost. Dr. Moss couldn't remember my name after she restored me, but I will remember hers until the day I die, and I'll teach my children to remember it, and they'll teach their children. Her name will echo through generations because of what she chose to give. That's not death, that's immortality. Dr. Moss was buried in the memorial garden she had loved, beneath a tree that would grow for centuries. Her headstone bore a simple inscription, Dr. Keela Moss. She remembered so others could live. At the funeral's conclusion, something unexpected happened. 137 of the held, the restored individuals who were still alive 15 years later, stood together and spoke in unison, their voices creating a multilingual chorus. We are alive because you held us. We remember you, Keela Moss. We will always remember you. It was the most human thing any of them had ever done. 20 years after the remembering, the story had achieved something close to mythic status. It was taught in schools across 40 species. Philosophers debated its implications. Artists created works inspired by its themes. The 200 volunteers, fewer than half still alive, were living legends, though most couldn't fully understand their own significance. But the most important legacy was the quietest. Throughout the galaxy, when faced with impossible choices and profound suffering, beings from dozens of species would pause and ask, what would humans do? Sometimes they would choose intervention despite the cost. Sometimes they would remember instead of forgetting. Sometimes they would sacrifice profit for principle, or calculation for compassion. Not always, not even most of the time, but sometimes, and sometimes was enough to change things. In human space, new generations of restoration specialists trained in the memorial persistence protocols. The technology had improved. Volunteers now retained more cognitive function, but the principle remained. Humans would sacrifice themselves to remember others back into existence, because that's what humans did. They remembered. They refused to accept that loss was final. They held the dead so completely that memory became resurrection, and when called, they answered, across light years, without hesitation, asking nothing in return except the promise that their sacrifice would be remembered too. 30 years after the remembering, the last of the original 200 volunteers passed away. His name was Marcus Chen. He had restored a Threne geologist named Priesel, and though Chen's post-procedure cognitive function had been severely limited, he had lived contentedly for 3 decades, always smiling when told what he had achieved. At his funeral, Priesel, now an elderly threen with 4 grandchildren, spoke through tears. Marcus Chen couldn't remember who I was after he brought me back. But I remember him. I remember that a human I never met thought my life was worth the price of his memories, worth the price of his own identity. I've lived 30 extra years because of him. I've done good work. I've raised a family. I've contributed to my community. All of that exists because Marcus Chen refused to let me stay erased. The humans taught us something we didn't know we needed to learn, that the greatest form of love is remembering so completely that memory becomes salvation. Marcus Chen is gone now, but he lives in every moment I've experienced since he restored me. He lives in my children, who wouldn't exist without him. He lives in the research I've published and the students I've taught and the gardens I've planted. He lives because I remember him, and I will never forget. 50 years after the remembering, Director Pyla Rennick, now ancient by Anthari standards, made a final pilgrimage to Earth. She traveled to the Memorial Garden, where the 200 volunteers were buried beneath trees that had grown tall and strong. She moved slowly through the peaceful grounds, reading each headstone, speaking each name aloud. When she reached Dr. Kayla Moss's grave, she knelt carefully and placed a crystal, a piece of her homeworld, on the stone. "I'm 89 years old," she said softly, knowing no one could hear but needing to say it anyway. "I've lived a full life, a good life, all because you remembered me. I wanted you to know that it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every damaged memory, every lost cognitive function. You saved 187 of us, and through us you saved thousands more. Our children, our students, our communities. The ripples of what you did are still spreading. That's not just restoration, that's resurrection on a civilizational scale. Thank you, Dr. Moss. Thank you for holding me. Thank you for refusing to let me stay erased. I'll see you soon. And when I do, I promise I'll remember you perfectly. I'll tell you everything you did, every life you saved, every person who exists because you wouldn't let them be forgotten. That's the least I can do for someone who gave everything to bring me back." She stayed there until sunset, beneath the tree that had grown from the ground where a hero was buried. When she finally stood to leave, she whispered one last thing. "They thought no one was coming. They thought they were forgotten. And then you came, carrying memory like a weapon, refusing to accept that loss was final. You showed the galaxy what humans truly are, the ones who remember, the ones who hold us, the ones who bring us back." Stories like this remind us that the greatest power isn't found in weapons or technology, but in the refusal to forget. If you'd like to hear more tales of humanity's place among the stars, consider subscribing. And if you're wondering what other ancient technologies might be hidden in the galaxy, technologies that weren't built by the species we know today, well, that's a story for another time. One involving a discovery that made the erasure fields look simple by comparison. Until then, remember, somewhere in the universe, someone is watching, someone is listening, and if you call for help, that help will come. Because that's what the ones who remember do. They answer.